One of the more commonly held beliefs in fitness is that a runner's knee has an expiration date. Is that true? Or is it yet another incredible myth of health and fitness? The longevity of the runner's knee, today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Hey, welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I so appreciate you joining us to work on dispelling yet another myth in the world of health, fitness, and wellness, which is what this podcast is built on, of course. So I'm so glad to have come across some new information in this field because it's something that I have believed ever since I started this argument with a health practitioner over 35 years ago, and which actually helped develop the talk that I started giving 20 years ago on dispelling the myths of health, fitness, and wellness. Running is of course, an incredibly popular sport. If you're not a runner, you know a runner, you have one in your family. This goes back to Jim Fixx. It goes back even farther than that. If you really want to go back, it goes back to the Battle of Marathon and the one soldier who made it back and exclaimed Nike, which means victory. And this is where some folks' idea of running began, and it's true. The running's been around for years. It's been a fitness activity. Speaking of Nike, the Waffle Runner was one of the first fitness shoes ever really put out there. It's an extremely popular sport. We still have plenty of clients that get their start in either walking and or running. But there's a very popular belief about running, and that is that it has a timeline. There is a timeline for how long you can be a runner. It's popularly believed it's not only amongst individuals, but amongst runners themselves, and certainly in the health, fitness, and wellness community. Now, the reason for this is typically associated with the knees, that years and years of pounding or running cause the knees to degenerate. And nobody really questions this. They may say it depends on the way you run or the type of shoes you have, when you began running, or even your fitness level, like personal trainers talk about building strength in order to protect the knees. But most everyone still believes that all of these different factors, shoes and fitness level and longevity of running and what have you, all of these are only ways to maybe slow down what is inevitable, which is no matter what you do, you will wear out your knees and you will quit running. If you're a fan of the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast, and I certainly hope you are, and if you are, please like and share this. If you are, you know that I have a real problem with the concept that time passing on a calendar causes us to deteriorate, and you should know by now that I do believe we do these things to ourselves. An argument can be made that we destroy our knees because we're running, and that's how we do it to ourselves, but what you may or may not know is that, yes, I do believe that we do these things to ourselves, but when the human body is built to do certain types of physical activity, it's not built for a timeline. It's not built to only do that for a certain amount of time. In other words, our brain is not built to only think for a certain amount of time. Our digestive system is not built only to digest for a certain amount of time. Our joints aren't built just to live for a certain amount of time. We're not supposed to be able to get up off the floor only for a certain amount of time. But what is not commonly accepted is that when done correctly, all of these functions of our body, we can continue doing these pretty much forever. We don't know the end date for all this. That's probably the argument I've had all along. It's the argument that I base the lie of age on. The fact that we've just generally accepted that our body has a timeline and things just stop and wear out, and that's it. There's no reason to ever question it. My statement is that we don't know. We don't know the end date. And I'll argue with anybody that nobody knows that end date. Nobody has any idea. Nobody knows that we can't actually live forever. Is Garrett saying that we should live forever? No, that's not the point I'm making. But what I am saying is that we don't have that deadline, that timeline, that ending. We don't know that. We don't know it for sure. Now, the running has been, again, I'm backing up and stating again what I've just said, that running is a popularly held belief that we will have a timeline on it, but there's new studies out that are starting to look at, well, wait a second. if we're made to run and our joints are going to have this quote unquote pounding, are they not built to handle it? Is there not another way of looking at this? Is there not a possibility of taking the science that we already know, the fact that we've known since the 70s that we can regrow muscle at any age. We know that we can do strengthening exercises to protect joints and what have you. We know that we can increase the longevity of the body. Taking that same thought process and looking at running again. And now we have. I want to be very clear before I talk about this study that no, Garrett is not cherry picking studies solely for the purpose of trying to dispel myths. I don't mean to seem like I'm just avoiding all these other studies that are proving the myth correct, because and just cherry picking the ones that argue with the accepted myth. Now that's not what's happening, but I'm sure that it looks that way because it is very difficult to find. It's very difficult to find studies that first aren't observational. Wow, all these people look like that, so therefore we can conclude that they have certain factors that cause these conditions. I've used the example before that, wow, all these people on this sidewalk seem to have a problem with their legs and lower extremities, like in the foot area. So evidently that sidewalk causes foot damage. And not looking at the fact or diving into it and finding out that sidewalk leads to the podiatrist office and those people are actually going in because they've come there because they have foot problems. That's what I call an observational study and come to those ridiculous conclusions. But it seems like I am cherry picking because it is difficult to find people that are taking the science that we know and actually looking at questioning these accepted myths. And I have to say that typically this comes from some of the millennials that are actually researchers now that look at things different. And there's something inherent about the millennial mindset and about millennials and the way they look at things. Pardon me if it seems like I'm going really off topic here, but I'm going to give you some information provided to me by Deanne DeMarco, who happens to be an expert on generations. She actually came and spoke to my Vistage group, and it was a very, very valuable presentation that she made about the different generations. And one of the ones that, of course, all of us were interested in, Vistage is the world's largest CEO organization. Everyone in our group are entrepreneurs. They all own their own business. And we are all dealing with hiring, selling to, what have you, the millennial generation. And so it was very interesting for us to learn a lot about them. And I'll give you some information. This is from a little book called Generation Gaps. It's a pocket resource that Deanne DeMarco puts out. And I'm quoting from that in the workplace, this generation, there's several factors about them. They believe in relationships more important than organizations. They desire open, authentic, and constant real-time information. And they want to offer opinions and input on how work gets done. But something that's very interesting about them is that Deanne DeMarco advises all of us that if you're not using millennials in your decision-making, then you're making a mistake. And the reason being, this may sound silly to you, but they're taught through playing video games over and over again to find new ways to look at things. And you think about it, do it again. That's when they mess up and they fail. They don't go capture the castle of Zelda or whatever. And please forgive my quotes because I don't play video games. I don't know all the new ways of looking at things. But because of that constant fail, try it again, fail, try it again, fail, try it again, causes them to look at things a little different. And this particular millennial that I'm interested in right now, and his name is Dr. Ross Miller of the University of Maryland Department of Public Health, specifically kinesiology. Let me give you a little bit of his background to show you that he probably knows what he's talking about. This background is very interesting to me. Typically, when I quote somebody, I would say, well, he's a kinesiologist with a certain university, has a PhD in the field, that's about it. But his resume is very interesting to me because not only is he, like I say, he fits in that millennial category, but he's a professor with tenure, associate professor with tenure at the University of Maryland. And not only does he have a master's degree in exercise and sports science and a PhD in kinesiology, earlier in his collegiate career, he got a BS in mechanical engineering and went on to get a master's degree in mechanical engineering and even has postdoctoral work in mechanical engineering from Queen's University. Now, I find this interesting because you've heard me say it before. The most intelligent machine you will ever encounter is, of course, the human body. Dr. Miller has done some studies on why running doesn't ruin your knees. Now, I'm quoting actually an article that was in the New York Times, and that was actually the title of the article. Of course, that grabs a lot of people's attention, why running doesn't ruin the knees. Dr. Miller did some very interesting studies about this. He realized that, like a lot of people believe, that that some runners do develop arthritis in the knees and what have you. But he also noticed, and this is what I love, he noticed that some people don't. Now, that seems very simple. That seems almost absurd to me for me to mention that, but you would not believe how many people only focus on the bad. Well, I know somebody, they got arthritis, and so therefore running causes arthritis. Nobody looks at the fact that there are people that have run in their 80s and 90s and still running and what have you, ran until they decided to depart the earth. This goes hand in hand with my argument of, yes, this happens to a lot of people at 60 and 70, but hey, what about this whole population that didn't generate at 60, 70, 80, and 90, where typically the excuse is, well, they're just lucky, or they just happen to have good genetics, or something else that makes it not their personal responsibility. Dr. Miller looked at the pounding that was going on and started comparing it to walkers. And he found out some things that are very interesting in some of the studies he did. He used, it's a kind of a neat technique. He had walkers and runners conduct their walking and running on the surface that had plates that was measuring the pressure that was being exerted on the joints and what have you, and actually the pressure, of course, the pressure going into the plates themselves, but he could deduce that pressure was going into the knee for walkers and runners. And what he found is, of course, runners had more pressure when they would actually land on the plates, land on the surface, on their knees than walkers did. Actually, this seems like common sense. Something I was surprised I never thought about. And that is that, yes, runners are doing a harder pounding when they land, but they're landing less often than walkers are landing. Think about it. In order to actually be running, you have to have both feet leave the ground at some point in time. And in fact, that's the way that race walking is judged. If you're in a walking race where both feet are off the ground at the same time, you are now running and you are now disqualified. So think about that. If you're running, jogging, whatever you want to call it, you're actually hitting the ground less times than you are walking. Now, I think you're going to come to the same deduction that I did. Well, that's pretty simple to figure. If you're hitting, I'm just making up these numbers, in a 20-foot span, if you're hitting the ground, 15, 20 times versus hitting the ground 5 or 6 times, well, you may be hitting the ground harder at those 5 or 6 times, but you're not hitting it as often as 15 or 20 times. And he actually deduced that some walkers were actually doing cumulative pressure on their knees was higher than the runners. The other part of the study was fascinating to me. The question about developing arthritis and developing problems in the knees usually breaks down to cartilage. Cartilage is that soft tissue, typically in between bones and what have you, or not just typically, that's where it exists. And it acts as a cushion. And I'm sure many people are familiar with cartilage. Having a medial meniscus tear in your knee, such as I have, is a tear in the cartilage. And the reason we know that will not repair, I say we know, we believe, I'm going to put that one on it because maybe we find one day when we can actually regrow cartilage. But the reason that we quote unquote accept that is that because cartilage does not have its own blood flow. But what Dr. Miller has deduced from these studies is some of this is extrapolated out over looking at copious amounts of other research that have been done on knees and joints and cartilage itself. And he's able to deduce that cartilage, like most body parts, may be reactionary. Some of the studies that Dr. Miller looked at and started basing some of his theoretical studies on were studies about animals. And the animals who ran tended to have thicker, healthier knee cartilage than comparable tissues from sedentary animals. This suggested that the active animal's cartilage had changed in response to their running. We do copious amounts of studies on animals, and the reason being is that I don't want to get into that discussion, but we're able to draw a lot of similarities to what happens in the human body from animal reactions. This is stating that they are seeing the cartilage have a reaction to the running and actually starts developing a thicker, healthier knee cartilage. Now, after he reviewed this, Dr. Miller speculated cartilage in human runners' knees likewise might alter and adapt. Now, to find out, he asked a group of healthy young men and women to walk or run along a track, again, the track that I was talking about earlier that contained these force plates, and his colleagues filmed them when they were doing this. They then computed the forces the volunteers had generated while strolling and running, and finally, they modeled what the future might hold for the volunteers' knees. In order to get to this conclusion or find these answers, not only did they use the force plate numbers, the results they were getting from running on those force plates, but they combined that with extensive additional data from past studies of biopsied cartilage that had been drawn out and basically beat up, pummeled in a lab, and to see how it reacted. And the findings were pretty amazing. This produced quite a bit of data, but I'm going to see if I can paraphrase it for you. They found that walkers faced about a 36% chance of developing arthritis by the age of 55. Now, this is they did this by, like I say, the taking the information from the force plates and combining that with some data out there in order to project what was going to happen in the future. We do this all the time in studies. Again, there was a 36% chance of developing arthritis by the age of 55. Now, this was if the model did not include the possibility of the knee cartilage adapting or repairing itself, like they saw in animals. But that risk dropped to about 13% if the cartilage was assumed to be able to repair or adapt. Now, this happens to be what studies predict to be the real-world arthritis risk for otherwise healthy people. Now, that was for walkers. Follow me on this now. You can hear some bad numbers that may seem to disprove what I'm talking about, but listen to me through the end. This is pretty interesting. Now, for runners, when the model assumed cartilage cannot change, like they did with the walkers, they assumed at some point that it cannot change. It just deteriorates and what have you. The model assumed the cartilage couldn't change. The risk of eventual arthritis for the runners was a whopping 98%, declining only to 5% if the model factored in the possibility of cartilage repair. In effect, of course, according to the scenario, the damage to the cartilage from frequent running would overwhelm any ability of the tissue to fix itself. But if the model included the likelihood of the cartilage actively adapting, again, back to the animal studies like they had, and growing thicker and cushier when the people ran, the odds of the runners developing arthritis fell to about 13%. Does that sound familiar? It's the same percentage as the walkers. Pretty fascinating. These studies do suggest that cartilage is malleable. It reacts to the strains, it reacts to the pounding, it reacts to the pressure, and adapts, much like the human body does in many other ways, copious amounts of ways. I've talked to people that are trying to gain weight. I've just recently spoken to some parents of teenagers that have the quote-unquote curse of the high metabolism. They're thin. We want them to gain some muscle and what have you. Well, the body has adapted to what I like to term a starvation mode. Now, that doesn't mean really a bad thing, but you teach the body that it's not going to get a lot of food. The body reacts and goes, okay, then we're going to not grow muscle. We're going to only store fat when we have a little bit of excess, and we're going to learn to run this body off this low energy. We're going to create a thin look in the body. We're not going to be able to grow much muscle. And you have to teach it over an amount of time that you're going to give it more calories, more protein, what have you. And after about 7 to 10 days, the body will start to adapt. This is very common. A body adapts to, much like a stomach adapts to continually overfilling it. It grows to adapt to that, and it grows to adapts to storing body fat all over the body. The same thing I teach people about drinking water, that your body will adapt to 100 ounces a day. If you've lived in a dehydrated and drank less than 100 ounces, your body adapted to that. We're seeing the same thing. Dr. Miller is proposing that we have the same thing going on with cartilage. Okay, that was a lot of information, I know. But the reason I'm bringing this up is yet again, we are looking at somebody that is taking the time to take the current science that we have out there, that our body is the most intelligent machine that we will ever know, and that we've been studying it since the 1700s, and we still don't have all the answers, then we shouldn't draw any hasty conclusions that it can't do some of these amazing things. We're drawing these hasty conclusions that time is causing these problems. Let me give you some information that you can take and run with on, okay, what if I want to continue to run and don't want to hurt my knees? Well, I'm going to show you some information. This is not new and breaking. This is stuff we've known for years. In fact, it's stuff that I've used in my practice for going on 30 years now. First and foremost, the question in running is typically the knees and the joints. Can be ankles and what have you. Well, around every joint you've got, not only do you have a lot of soft tissue, cartilage and what have you, but you've got muscles. Muscles are there, like I've said before, muscles are there to protect the bone, and they're there to absorb the shock, absorb the cushion, what have you. Developing the quadricep, that big, thick muscle, your thigh muscle, making sure that it is strong. At the same time, the one that is neglected all the time, boy, I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk about how neglected the hamstrings are, but developing the hamstring strength, making sure that all of the muscles around that knee joint are strong. Now, this is something that exacerbates the belief about knees going bad. I blame on the running community. Yes, I am pointing my finger at you. Why? Because if I run, I have strong legs is a popularly held myth. It's wrong. Myth in the running community. I don't do legs because I run. And since I run, I have strong legs. That's not true. In fact, in most cases, you're deteriorating your hamstring, and if not your quadricep. In order to maintain running, in order to maintain biking, in order to maintain swimming throughout your life, you've got to keep those muscles strong. So simple resistance training will help develop the muscle around any of those joints, shoulder joints for swimmers, hip joints for cyclists, knee joints for cyclists, knee joints for runners. Developing those muscles, maintaining the strength in those muscles throughout your life will allow you to continue doing these activities. Flexibility. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. Maintaining flexibility. The stronger the muscle is, the more flexible it is, and making sure you're doing flexibility work after you're running, after your resistance training, not before. Do not use it as a technique to warm up. It's not a technique to warm up. But using that afterwards, whatever increases the range of motion between two joints. Therefore, by increasing the range of motion, you're going to decrease the stress on those joints. So maintaining flexibility. A very obvious one is lose weight. You're going to lower the amount of pressure on your knees from walking, from running, from standing, everything, if you maintain a healthy weight. Now, y'all know how I feel about weight. Weight is the gravitational pull of the earth on your body. And if you've got strong muscles and you've got a good body fat percentage, then you've got your quote unquote weight, the gravitational pull on your body is okay. But you understand what I mean. Making sure that you've got strength, a lot of good strength around those joints, and then making sure that you're not putting any undue pressure by carrying, adipose tissue, heavy amounts of adipose tissue. Balance, obviously balance. In the balance is, as I've said many times, is located in the brain, but of course it affects the physical. And if you have weaknesses in your hips and weaknesses and imbalance in your muscles, you're going to have your balance is going to be off. But maintaining balance will keep you from having undue stress on your knee joints. Having bad balance can actually make you run somewhat crooked, and that can put undue stress on your knees. Increasing your hip strength. I've spoken about hamstrings because a lot of people don't think of hamstrings when they think of protecting the knee. It's on the back of the leg. It's not the one it's not the muscle that I see that's surrounding the knee joint. Therefore, I'm not worried about it. Hamstrings are important. But the one that we don't think about a lot that results in knee pain, and I mean, you'll find a point in your knees, wow, this hurts. And your physical therapist or your exercise physiologist, not your weekend certified personal trainer, but your exercise physiologist, such as our staff, what can pinpoint that actually it's coming from your hip. Hip weakness causes back pain. It causes knee pain. It can even cause ankle pain and definitely hip pain. But making sure medial glutes, the lateral movement work that I've so encouraged all of you to do, making sure you're maintaining that will maintain a balance in your hips, a balance in the strength. It will maintain balance overall, and it'll also absorb a lot of the pressure from your upper body, and a lot of the pressure just from the pounding in general, from your upper body down to your knees. And again, protecting your knees. Making sure that you're not hyperextending the knee. Making sure you're not, locking out and hyperextending the knee. That happens a lot of times on a leg press. People will press a leg press up high and they're wanting quick breaks, so they'll lock their knee. What happens is for a brief millisecond, that weight comes back down on the foot. Though you may not think of it, it didn't leave my foot. Yes, but it went somewhat weightless for a minute, and then the pressure went back down your foot on a hyperextended knee. If you lock your knee, it's in a position where when the weight comes back down, it can force the knee to go in the other direction. Ever so lightly, ever so briefly, so much so that you won't notice it until you've done it for a long time and you start causing pain. So making sure that you're not hyperextending your knee is extremely important. Inappropriate sitting. If you don't know about this one, see my podcast on the most important exercise you'll ever do, which is the squat. And the squat, everybody does. If you sit down, you squat. And we all sit down and stand up wrong. If we correct that, again, we're not putting undue pressure on the knee. Therefore, we're not prematurely degenerating the knee. And something as simple as, kneeling down on a hard surface on your knees without knee pads. We weren't really made to do that. These are simple things. These are simple adaptations you can make to your lifestyle in order to protect your knees. I like this study, and I like what Dr. Miller's doing, and countless other scientists like them are doing, is not following the myths, and instead using the science that we have out there to find the real answers. There's something else I like about this also, not just because I did run track, but to say that I ran track was a pole vaulter. I ran 120 feet, so I really can't say that I ran track. But I come across countless clients that are runners who thoroughly enjoy it. They do it for their head more than they do it for their body. It's an escape. And to take that away from somebody, I think is criminal. It's like taking meditation away from somebody. I would much rather clients of mine, these friends of mine, these people I know that enjoy this activity, much like I enjoy swimming for the same reason. I want them to be able to do it the rest of their lives. Just like by dispelling these myths, we can enjoy a lot of our physical activity for a lot longer. We can enjoy our lives for a lot longer if we would just not buy into all the myths. Hey, if you need more help with that, or you're interested in some workout programs in order to maintain the strength in your knee, you're interested in seeing how can you make sure that you don't run into these problems, or if you're already starting to experience difficulties in that joint or any others, give us a call. There's things that we can do to help you design a program in order to mitigate the damage, avoid it altogether, or make adaptations in order to increase your level of wellness. Contact us here at Personal Edge Fitness. You can contact me through email, garrett@personaledgefitness.com. That's our website, Personal Edge Fitness. Also, our Facebook page. Feel free to contact us at our mobile location at area code 251-341-0927, or speak to our Eastern Shore manager, Josh, at area code 251-651-0927. Dispelling the myths about ruining knees through running. Yet another way we help you live your level of wellness. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.